Ma'am? Ma'am, could you take this? Yes.
I must say it was a great honor to release this book, and this theme, the theme of sexual violence by state forces during times of conflict, during times when the state is trying to reassert its hold over Bastar, and when the people of Bastar are engaged in a very large collective struggle across political views, across spectrums, all over the state to resist militarization. And of course the militarization follows upon a lap grab move, because there is, behind militarization, there is this huge attempt to take over the lands of Bastar, the natural resources of Bastar, and actually of the entire Chhattisgarh, which is one of our richest states, and to try and hand those over to corporate resources and bring in so-called modern development into a region like Bastar. The state is totally regardless of the fact that so many cultural diversities, so much richness, so much cultural richness that lies there, so many different kinds of people, so many different tribes, different women, different biodiversity of the forest, of agriculture, different lifestyles. So much of it is going to be destroyed in the process, and there is a complete ruthless land grab and develop kind of model going through. Of course, in Mumbai, we are witness to the development model that, that is the mainstream development model, the larger the better. Whereas I think in Bastar, the way that people have lived there for centuries, it has been the smaller the better, and the more local the better. There is so much diversity in Bastar. I mean, it's impossible to really be here in this setting as alien as this and to recount all of that, and particularly with this noise going on in the background, it's even harder. But anyway, I hope you can hear, and I hope you can at least try and engage. I want to tell you about, I really don't know, because the report I have only just got into my hands, and I've just managed to glance at it maybe a few minutes ago. But the theme is an old theme. The theme of sexual violence in Bastar has been there with the people of Chhattisgarh, with the people of South Bastar, North Bastar, actually of the entire state, and with the women of the world for a very, very long time. Because whenever there is this attempt at domination, dominating an area, either by a particular state power, be it Yugoslavia, be it, be it Kosovo, be it Bastar, be it Chhattisgarh, be it any other context, it's the same story, because the state always resorts to militarization. And one of the ways in which this is done is at the cost of women's bodies. Women become the site of contestation, and raping women, sexually violating women is somehow, it becomes a symbol of the mardangi, of the masculinity of the state, and of, getting hold and dominating the people. Entire communities in this way are sought to be subordinated. So it's a very long story, and it's only very recently, of course, Yug Chaudhary is with us and he will tell us. It's only very recently that in international legal systems, this has been recognized as a crime, and I believe a few convictions of sexual violence during times of conflict and militarization have taken place in the case of the former Yugoslavia, and some in the case of the genocide in Rwanda. But the script is really the same. So at one level, this is a huge tragedy for women, and women are at the, when they kind of bear the brunt of this on their bodies. So many women are raped everywhere. I mean, there are stories coming out of Kashmir, of Manipur, of Nagaland. There are Temsula stories. If we read these, we kind of, it's like living through a Naga village at the time of when the conflict was at its height. And, people are really struggling for survival. The men have all fled to the forest, or some of them may have joined the insurgents, and this army platoon comes in searching, and who do they find in the village? They find old people, and they find women, and they find children, and of course raping the women, and somehow, kind of asserting the presence of the state in that situation. That is the easiest thing to do, and that is what is often resorted to. And many of these stories, I mean, Tensula House stories, I would suggest that I think most of us have read them and been moved by them, but those of us who haven't, I would suggest that we go to these stories and just figure out, find out for ourselves and emotionally connect with what women face in these situations. The women of Bastar, of course, many of them do not have access to our, our mediums of writing and writing short stories or, putting it in words in that way. But so many of them have resisted and so many of them have struggled. And I think the book that we have just had access to today, that book reveals many of these narratives of courage, of resistance, and of course we have organizations like the WSS, which takes upon itself to document some of these experiences and make them available to the larger literate world. And it's through these efforts that we come to know nationally, perhaps even beyond the borders of our nation, of something that is deeply serious and deeply worrying that is going on in the heartland of our country. I just want to tell you a little bit about what Chhattisgarh, the Chhattisgarh that I have known. When I was introduced, it was said that I had lived there for 30 years. I went there at a time when some of the hearts close to the border of Bastar, we still had situations in which Adivasis would come from the village with large sacks of lac or other forest produce, and they would bring it to these markets, and the traders who would come would take two entire sackfuls of forest produce and give them maybe 2 kilograms of salt in return. And salt, oil, these are commodities that people in the villages do not have. So for them to be able to cook, to have something close to a meal that tastes of which our taste buds have learned to appreciate, salt is essential and oil is essential. So these are very precious commodities there. The forests were, I can't even begin to describe them, because much of the forests around Dali Rajhara, where I first lived, those forests were destroyed. They were cut down when the mining began, and this must have been in the 50s or in the 60s of the last century. And many years ago, when I was trying to research for my book, I met the person, actually he's quite a well-known person, Bimalendu Mukherjee, who is the father of the sitar player, Buddhaditya Mukherjee. He used to be mines manager in that area, and the first kind of development of the mines was under his direction. So we talked about, how they had surveyed the place and how they had chosen the sites for the mines and how they had, undertaken development. And of course, one question that I had was, did the people not resist? Did anybody not say anything? Were there no protests against, what you were trying to do at that time? So he said, log bahut seedhe the, people were very simple. We kind of explained that what we are doing is, for your own good. And your little Dali Rajhara, your Jharandali, where a Jharna waterfall kind of came down from the hills. And there was a passage, there was a sort of a pass through the mountains going into Bastar. Your Jharandali will become like Jamshedpur, it will become like Tata Nagar. And, maybe why don't we go there? So some people were actually taken on guided tours to see what a beautiful place Tata Nagar was. And there was this huge park in Tata Nagar in the center. And, you will have parks like this, you will have schools like this, you will have hospitals like this. No woman will ever die in childbirth, etc., etc. So these are, kind of very, not very expensive things to do, I suppose, for a large company. And some of this was done. So really there was no protest at that time, he said. And then I said, what were the forests like? Because even today when we go out of Dali Rajhara and we kind of travel for 10 kilometers or 15 kilometers, we come into beautiful forests, the forests which, in many parts of India we never see. So he said, don't ask me about the forests. If I feel bad about anything, I feel bad about the destruction of the forests, because the forests were beyond compare. So Bastar is like that. Bastar is largely like that. The forests were beyond compare. Now they are slowly being destroyed, slowly being cut down. Cash economy has come in. there were so many cultural forms. There was so much, rich culture among the people. Gondi art today is very well known, and many institutions, many offices. It's fashionable to have Gondi art, tribal art put up on the walls, and the middlemen, the people who kind of buy the art from the tribals, they sell it at a premium, and some people even organize exhibitions in international cultural centers. So all of this goes on. But there was this little village close to Narayanpur in Abujmar, at the gate of Abujmar, where there were two very famous artists. One was Pandi, who was Pandi was a wood carver, and some of the things that he made with the sal wood, the sarai wood, I mean, those were so beautiful. They were so fantastic. And sarai wood does not actually attract termites or other insects, and it lasts for ages and ages. So seeing some of his artwork, and sometimes the question that I ask myself is that, will Pandi ever find, or Pandi or the next generation of Pandis, will they have the wood to carve with? And if they don't have the wood to carve with, then some of this talent, some of this cultural heritage will go out of Bastar, will go out of our lives, out of our histories. There was this painter called Belgur, and Belgur's art was, again, it was something. I mean, it's to be seen, to be believed. I mean, you go into this village, some 15 kilometers outside of Narayanpur, and you keep going, and you come to this cluster of huts, a little hamlet, and there is Belgur sitting on his mud floor, and he's working with, he used to use organic colors in the earlier, but of late, I mean, some of his paintings have sold, and he's using crayons and pastels now. But he's such a fantastically imaginative person. So will Belgur ever find his colors? Will he find themes to paint about? I think this is also what we need to ask ourselves. Habib Tanveer, when he began to recruit his mandali, the Naya Theatre, which gave us so much of, such interesting and such fabulous works like Charandas Shore and Gaon Ke Naam Damad, Gaon Ke Naam Sasural Mor Naam Damad, Agra Bazaar, etc., etc. He recruited his artists from Bastar because the people of Bastar really knew how to perform uninhibitedly, and their expressions, their art, their the way they presented themselves and their confidence, they spoke their own language. Habib Tanveer kind of always said that the language did not matter. For an actor, what was important was the way you held yourself and what you managed to convey to your audience. It didn't matter whether you spoke Chhattisgarhi, whether you spoke Gondi, the audience would understand you, and that's exactly what happened. The Naya Theatre has gone all over the world and been much appreciated. So these were actually artists from Bastar, which is the the context of which we are talking today, and the unfortunate report, which it is our unfortunate duty to have to release today. So that is the scenario, and a friend of ours, the last thing on culture is that a friend of ours, Anup Ranjan Pandey, has very recently, he's got together a group of performers, singers, drummers, people who play pipe instruments and percussion instruments. He's got them together, and he's got a group together called the Bastar Band, which is still trying to kind of bring this art and cultural heritage of Bastar out into the larger world. But today it's not possible to deal with the story of Bastar only through its art or through the richness of what the people have. They do have that. It's unfortunate that along with the cultural richness, they are also inheritors to material richness. Bastar has huge forest reserves and huge mineral reserves, uranium, tin, iron ore, copper, corundum, precious stones, diamonds. The diamond mines, when I was working on my book, I found that there are diamond mines in parts of Abujmar, and those mines, actually the prospecting license has been taken by the world's largest mineral company, which is De Beers, and De Beers is holding on, waiting for the conflict to get over, and waiting for people's resistance to die down. I hope it never does, but they have not yet begun prospecting, and when they begin prospecting, then we find out how much there is actually there, and what profits the corporations and the giant corporates are planning to make out of Bastar. So this is the scenario against which we need to understand the militarization and the use that female bodies are put to, and the way in which women are, the generations and generations of women in context after context in the world have faced sexual violence, and this is the context in which we need to understand Bastar. I have not lived there more or less since 2006, so in a sense I don't think I'm out of touch, but some of the events that have been documented in the report and some of the cases that have been contested, I think the other panelists are more competent to speak about that. So I don't want to really exhaust your patience, and thank you very much for listening.